Hello and welcome back to Born to Rant. I'm Brandon, and this week we are talking about a movie that manages to blend the horror and suspense of The Shining with the hard science fiction and practical sets of movies like Solaris, the best movie in director Paul W.S. Anderson's filmography, and one of Sam Neill's best performances as a seemingly normal man who slowly loses his mind. That's right, today we are talking about how 1997's Event Horizon came to be, everything that's made it stick in our minds, and its legacy almost 30 years later. Event Horizon is a movie that I definitely did not see when it came out. It wasn't until years later, and I was at a friend's house where someone threw it on, and I was kind of instantly hooked by it. First of all, Sam Neill and Laurence Fishburne, you're spoiling us, Paul. But seriously, even with the incredibly dated CGI images that quite literally litter the first part of Event Horizon, this movie has a look to it that borrows from several of my favorite science fiction titles and combines that with techno-goth imagery to create a movie that truly looks unlike anything else out there. And this is kind of an interesting movie in that it really does sort of start as hard science fiction before slowly devolving into schlocky horror, something that either really works for you or it doesn't. For me, I thought it worked really well for this movie, and I think a big part of that is the actors' performances mixed with the practical sets and makeup. Event Horizon is a movie that feels incredibly real and textured because, well, it is. These were real sets and there was minimal blue screen work done on this movie. But before we start getting too deep into everything that makes Event Horizon awesome, let's go back in time and learn how this movie came to be. After the release of in 1995, Anderson and his producing partner Jeremy Bolt were inundated with scripts and offers for Anderson's next project, and for some reason he really wanted to do something that was completely different than Mortal Kombat and his first film, Shopping. Apparently, Anderson turned down both Mortal Kombat Annihilation and X-Men, and I've got to be honest, I would kind of love to see Anderson's take on X-Men. I just kind of wonder what that would have been, what it would have looked like, and how it would have done at the box office. But like I said, he turned it down, and at this point he made it clear that he wanted to do an R-rated horror film to break away from his previous two PG-13 movies. And Paramount Pictures sent over the script for Event Horizon, which was written by Philip Eisner, whose main credit on IMDb is Event Horizon. And after Anderson officially signed on to direct Event Horizon, he did a large and uncredited rewrite because Eisner's original script featured large tentacled aliens and felt very much in the vein of the xenomorphs from Ridley Scott's Alien. And look, there's no denying that Alien still had a giant influence on Event Horizon, but I do think that Anderson was really smart to rewrite it and remove the aliens and instead have this be more of a haunted house movie in space where the ghosts remain largely unseen. Actually, Eisner said that his original intention with the script was to do The Shining in space, and I feel like Paul W.S. Anderson did a great job of converting what was already on the page to better match that original concept. And Event Horizon may not be as good or as well respected as Kubrick's The Shining, but I do think it creates a similar sense of suspense, dread, and isolation. And ironically enough, Event Horizon shot at the same time across the street from Kubrick's final movie before his death, Eyes Wide Shut. As for the casting process, based on what I could find, it seems like every actor was the first choice for the role, and they were all both intrigued by and a little baffled by the script, not quite understanding the tone or how violent the movie would actually end up being. One of the most interesting pieces of behind-the-scenes lore that I found when doing research is that for the most part, you're not going to see Sam Neill and Laurence Fishburne together in a two-shot or in any wide shots. This is because the two had such different acting styles and paces. Laurence Fishburne would usually nail his scenes in 3 takes or less and then clearly start to lose energy and steam, whereas Sam Neill needed 3 or 4 takes to really get warmed up, and he'd get better every single time. So to make sure he was getting the best performance possible from his two leads, Anderson made the decision to shoot them separately in close-ups as much as he could so that he could use the best takes from both of the actors. Filming for Event Horizon took place between November of 1996 and March of 1997, filming at the famous Pinewood Studios in in London on the Bond stage, which is notoriously freezing cold during the winter months, so the cast and crew were fairly miserable the entire time they were making this movie. After filming completed that March, Paramount came to Paul W.S. Anderson and asked him if he'd be willing to move his release date up because of some of the messiness with the production of Titanic and its ever-shifting release date. Just a real quick side note, isn't it fascinating that every time James Cameron makes a movie, everyone in the world is convinced it's going to be a disaster, and then the movie comes out and is one of the biggest movies of all time? It happened with Terminator 2, Titanic, and both Avatar movies. Anderson agreed to an expedited post-process, leading him to only have 6 weeks to turn in his first cut of the film, which ran over 2 hours long and was torn apart by test audiences. And Anderson does agree that the version that was shown to test audiences was far too long, but he also thinks that the studio made him cut about 10 minutes too much out of the final version of the movie. The runtime went from 2 hours down to just 96 minutes, and I see his point. I do think an extra 10 minutes would have made this movie just a little bit better. Unfortunately, those 10 minutes that Anderson would love to restore have been lost to time thanks to Paramount not taking care of and having lost most of the additional footage that was shot for Event Horizon. And on August 15th, 1997, Event Horizon was released into the world, where it was met with negative critical reviews and a disappointing return at the box office. On its opening weekend, Event Horizon made just $9.5 million against its $60 million budget and placed fourth at the box office behind Copland, Air Force One, and Conspiracy Theory. And actually, I'll probably end up making videos on all of those movies at some point down the road. At the end of its box office run, Event Horizon only managed to make $42 million worldwide, making it an objective flop for the studio. And I think that the big thing that happened here is that critics hate horror movies, especially bloody, schlocky ones like this, and I think they also let themselves be fooled by the opening of the movie, which does feel like a hard science fiction film, before turning into a gory horror movie with outlandish performances. And actually, Anderson said that one of the first people to call out that Event Horizon would go on to be re-evaluated as a cult classic was Kurt Russell when the two were preparing to make Soldier together shortly after the release of Event Horizon. And Russell told him to forget how the movie was doing now, and that in 15 years he'd be proud of and incredibly happy with the movie. And Russell was completely right, and I mean the guy would know a thing or two about being in flops that would go on to become classics. And with all of that out of the way, I think it's time we dive deep into 1997's Event Horizon and everything that makes it awesome. But before we go any further, here is your one and only spoiler warning for a movie that's over 25 years old. Okay, before I actually start diving into the plot of this movie, I have to be an annoying film school kid and talk about the fact that when I first put Event Horizon on to rewatch it for this video, I was kind of shocked that it reminded me of two movies. Alien, which, okay, that one's not surprising, but the other is Andrei Tarkovsky's Solaris. Now, I'm not saying that Event Horizon is Paul W. Anderson trying to channel Tarkovsky or anything like that, but I was surprised that Anderson would look to a movie like Solaris for inspiration on a movie like this. For those of you that don't know, Andrei Tarkovsky was a Russian filmmaker primarily known for his long, unbroken takes, slow pacing, and exploring themes of guilt and external forces. The plot of Solaris quite literally deals with powerful alien entities forcing the crew aboard a space station to confront their guilt and remorse. And Event Horizon really takes that concept and just dials it up to 11. But I would just like to say that I'm not trying to reclaim Event Horizon as some sort of art film masterpiece at all. But I was shocked by how much this movie made me think about Andrei Tarkovsky. It helps that the cinematography in Event Horizon can be absolutely breathtaking at times, all thanks to the late great Adrian Biddle, who was no slouch when it came to working on movies set in space, having been the focus puller on Alien and the cinematographer on Aliens. And before we go any further, let's get the cast out of the way because this is a giant cast and I feel like if I don't just do everyone up front, I'll forget and I just don't want to deal with that. We've got Laurence Fishburne as Miller, Sam Neill as Weir, Kathleen Quinlan as Peters, Joey Richardson as Stark, Richard T. Jones as Cooper, Jack Noseworthy as Justin, aka Baby Bear, Jason Isaacs as DJ, Sean Pertwee as Smith, and that is the entire crew of the Lewis and Clark, which is the spaceship we find ourselves aboard at the beginning of Event Horizon. And I think the opening of this movie is a big part of why this movie gets such a bad rap, because the first several shots of the movie look bad. Like, even for the time, these floating CGI objects just don't look good. And I think because it begins with these shots, it sort of gives people permission to write this movie off immediately. Don't get me wrong, these opening shots look bad, and I can understand even laughing at them, but you're quite literally missing the forest for the trees because look at these large practical sets that were built for the movie. Production designer Joseph Bennett and set decorator Crispin Salis really went all out on these things. Every single set piece looks and feels so incredibly real. Apparently it was very common for Laurence Fishburne to scribble NAR next to his lines in the script, and when Paul Anderson asked him what he was doing, Fishburne smiled and said no acting required, because he was just able to fully be in this world and react to what was actually happening in front of him. No pretending, just being present. Event Horizon opens with the crew of the Lewis and Clark and Weir heading into space and going into hypersleep, and this opening scene does a great job of setting up the dynamics between all of our different characters and that Weir is clearly the outsider. We learn that we're headed towards a ship called the Event Horizon that has been missing for 7 years, and Weir was the original architect for the Event Horizon. And the entire beginning of this movie feels very in line with the beginning of Alien, a group of working class space travelers awake from hypersleep and are told they're going to a distress signal. We also get Weir's explanation for how a black hole can theoretically bend spacetime, and his description is so perfect and easy to understand that Christopher Nolan would use the same example in Interstellar. Now, the crew of the Lewis and Clark is understandably not exactly stoked about everything they're being told, and this really doubles down when Weir plays them a tape of people screaming and howling and what appears to be a voice saying "Liberate me," which in Latin translates to "save me." We're then interrupted by the ship quickly approaching the Event Horizon, and Miller, Stark, and Smith have to jump into action, and the main reason I wanted to call this out is I think Miller's floating chair is super cool and I want one, and also the model of the ship here with the impossible clouds in space around reminds me so much of the models from Aliens, which again, Adrian Biddle also shot. Once our team reaches and latches onto the Event Horizon, Miller, Justin, and Peters make their way inside, and we get more bad CGI. But again, look at these incredible sets that the bad CGI is in. So while they're on the ship for the first time, we get some exposition about the ship's hull being lined with explosives to split the ship in half so that it turns into a lifeboat in case of an emergency. We're then introduced to what I think is objectively the coolest set piece in the entire movie, the meat grinder hallway leading to the gravity drive, both of which make you feel immediately uneasy and on edge, which only doubles when the gravity drive mysteriously activates and sucks Justin, aka Baby Bear, inside. And just real quick, I just have to say that whenever I see Jack Noseworthy pop up in something, all I can think about is him saying, "He's up there, kitten," in Idle Hands. Once Justin's been sucked into the drive, it releases a massive shockwave that damages the Lewis and Clark, forcing the rest of the crew to emergency evacuate and board the Event Horizon, which again, no one is super stoked on, well, except for Weir. And the aftermath of the shockwave is one of the most fun sequences in the movie. It's tense, but not horrific like some of the later scenes in the movie. The explosions are real and look great. We've got Cooper jumping into emergency mode and rushing to save Justin, and I love that they almost get impaled by Chekhov's spikes here that seem to have no real purpose other than being dangerous. After everything calms down, Stark gives us our update so we understand the stakes. They've got no radio, no beacon, air supply is limited, and draining every second. Cooper and Smith are then sent out to repair the Lewis and Clark to the best of their ability so the crew can get the hell out of there. While those two work on the ship, the Event Horizon gets to work on our crew, giving everyone intense hallucinations. Peters sees her son she had to leave behind covered in bloody lesions. Miller sees a colleague he was forced to let burn to death in zero gravity. But the best is Weir having to go into this cool little crawl space that's filled with computer motherboards, and the way they're lit with green makes this feel so futuristic yet modern and just overall very strange. The crew then converge and talk about their experience, which Weir of course lies and gaslights everyone about, and my favorite moment here is just when Smith says, "Call the laws of physics and you seriously think there would be a price?" It's just such a great line for a movie like this. While being left alone, Justin awakens from his catatonic state and immediately goes to the airlock to try and unalive himself, which is just another fantastic tense little sequence, and I like that Justin goes from fully committed to this idea to escape the horror to becoming completely lucid and begging for someone to save him. The imagery of Justin as the airlock begins to decompress is just excellent body horror, and the time bomb element of Miller trying to make his way to Justin in time to save him is just great thrilling filmmaking, and I like that they pull pull it off and that Justin doesn't die. I do think he would have been a really easy character to just kill off at this point, but I like that Event Horizon goes out of its way to show how loyal this crew is to one another. And here's where the horror of the movie really begins to kick into gear, with the crew having descrambled the footage left by the previous Event Horizon crew, which I can't show here without being demonetized or even describe really. Suffice it to say, it's some pretty horrific stuff, but it's the way that Miller's reaction is immediately,
"We're leaving."
And he orders everyone to speed up the repair process so that they can get out of there immediately. And I really love that Miller just full on ignores Weir's pleas to stay. Like, he's seen and heard enough, and his priority is to get his crew out of there safely. Kinda gives you false hope to see people acting so smart in a horror movie. While in their emergency evacuation process, Peters is lured to her death by images of her son calling out to her, and she's impaled on one of those large metal spikes that again seem to only exist to be dangerous. Weir finds her body, and this is where he fully loses his mind and cuts out his own eyes, giving himself over to the Event Horizon completely. And I feel like Sam Neill's ability to play this kind of normal everyman that loses his mind isn't talked about enough. He's so great in this movie, and this isn't even his best performance as a normal guy that slowly loses his mind due to supernatural forces. That would be possession or in the mouth of madness. Once he's possessed, he sneaks over to the Lewis and Clark to plant explosives and force the crew to remain on the Event Horizon with him, and he does successfully. He even kills Smith, and Cooper is blasted into deep space by the explosion, but this guy's so clever, he uses his air canister to blast his way back. Cooper rules, underrated fave. And as Weir is explaining his plan to activate the gravity drive, Cooper shows up at the window, causing Weir to shoot at him like a dummy and being sucked out into space, but don't worry, we'll see more of him shortly. Cooper, Stark, and Miller manage to seal off the bridge and make a plan to split the Event Horizon in two and use the back half as a lifeboat and remain in stasis until they can be rescued. However, after Miller has successfully set the explosives, he's attacked by the new fully materialized hallucinations from earlier, including a completely resurrected Weir who reveals that the Event Horizon won't let him die, and just in the nick of time, Miller detonates the explosives just before the gravity drive activates, saving his crew. We then get a fun little psych out ending with Stark hallucinating that one of the people rescuing them is the mutilated Weir, and then it's revealed not to be, or is it? So over 25 years later, what is the legacy of Event Horizon? Well, at this point, it's one of those movies that it seems like you either really enjoy or you think it's kind of bad, but either way, I think you have to agree it has some great moments, and I really do believe it's the best movie that Paul W.S. Anderson has ever directed. Like, I totally can understand why people don't like this movie. Its screenplay is a little messy, the gore is a little over the top, but also this is just an incredibly good looking movie. The kind of movie that if it came out today, it would be hailed as a cinematic masterpiece simply for using real sets and limited CGI. And again, Christopher Nolan even stole the wormhole explanation from this movie because it's so perfect and easy to understand. The point is that Event Horizon is an absolute cult classic at this point. It's not perfect, but it's an incredibly interesting movie and really just makes you remember a time when movies felt a little more real and a little more scary. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for watching, and a special thank you to my patrons who produced this video. You all help make these videos possible. If you'd like to be credited as an executive producer or producer, you can find a link to the Patreon in the description below. Patrons get to help me pick which movies to cover on the channel and get access to an exclusive Discord server. Born to Rant is a completely independent channel, and I use absolutely no AI in the making of my videos, so please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We release new videos covering all of your childhood favorites every Thursday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.